I want you to picture something for just a second. Imagine you're walking into this grand cosmic courtroom.
Oh, wow. Okay. Setting the scene.
Right. So the heavy oak doors are looming right in front of you. And you know that waiting inside is the ultimate villain of all human history.
You're bracing yourself for the worst.
Exactly. You are completely bracing yourself. You're expecting this terrifying monster, right? A towering creature of like fire and brimstone, exuding pure malevolence.
Laughing maniacally in the shadows.
Yeah. But then you push those doors open, and sitting alone at this massive table, well, it isn't a monster at all.
Which is the best part.
It really is.
Yeah.
Instead, in walks this incredibly exhausted, overworked clerk. His shoulders are slumped. He's carrying this impossibly tall stack of manila folders, and he drops them on the desk with a heavy thud.
Just completely defeated.
Yes. He rubs his eyes and just asks the empty room if he can please finally go home.
It is such a jarring, brilliant image. Because you brace yourself for the architect of all worldly evil, right? The great tempter.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, you get this deeply fatigued bureaucrat who looks like he hasn't slept in about 3,000 years.
I have to admit, I picked up The Antichrist in the Paradox of Faith by Berns' pen, expecting, a fairly standard, maybe slightly edgy, supernatural thriller.
Yeah, that's what the title kind of implies.
Right, but that opening premise completely dismantled my expectations. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
Thrilled to be here for this one.
Today we are spending our time unpacking a book that uses real historical and religious backdrops, specifically the sweeping history of Christianity, to explore the absolute darkest, most complex corners of human nature.
It's honestly incredible.
It is easily the most profound piece of speculative fiction I've read this season. You absolutely have to see how the author handles this concept. It is a total masterclass in building philosophical tension.
The author creates this truly unique psychological space right from the first chapter. And, because this is a work of fiction, Berns' pen has the liberty to play with immense theological concepts.
Which he does so well. Okay, let's unpack this. What happens when the ultimate villain of human history turns out to be nothing more than an exhausted bystander?
Well, the narrator of the book is the Antichrist, as we said. But as your courtroom analogy illustrates, he isn't out there actively tempting people.
Right.
He isn't whispering in the ears of dictators or orchestrating historical tragedies. He suffers from what the author describes as a profound existential weariness.
Hold on, I'm stuck on something right out of the gate here. If he's so utterly exhausted by humanity, why doesn't he just, quit?
That's the logical question, right?
Yeah. Can't he just walk out of the courtroom and hand in his resignation?
That is the crux of the entire narrative. He can't quit because of the very mechanism of his existence.
Yeah.
He doesn't possess agency in the way humans do.
Oh, interesting. So he's trapped.
Completely. He is a manifestation of consequence. He describes himself in the text as like the sudden chill that follows an act of hatred.
Oh, wow.
Or the sharp metallic tang in the air when someone chooses greed over compassion. He is bound to the earthly plane by human action.
So he doesn't cause the evil?
Not at all. He merely bears witness to our endless self-inflicted cycles of cruelty. He is sustained by it.
So he's literally just taking notes, and that introduces this massive emotional stake that you just feel on every single page.
It's palpable.
He genuinely wants to be defeated. He is practically begging for his own destruction.
Yes, because if humanity actually chooses genuine love, if they actually practice what figures like Jesus taught, like radical kindness and forgiveness, the Antichrist will starve.
Right, he will literally cease to exist.
Which completely flips the traditional dynamic of good and evil. Human beings in this story are not his victims.
No, they're not.
They are completely unwittingly his jailers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like being forced to watch a horrific slow-motion train crash on a loop for millennia.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
And society blames you for the crash just because you happen to be standing by the tracks holding a clipboard.
Exactly.
You didn't lay the faulty tracks. You didn't tell the conductor to speed up. You are just legally bound to stand there and document the wreckage.
What's fascinating here is that it forces you, the reader, into a very uncomfortable corner.
Oh, absolutely.
By making the Antichrist a passive observer fed by our negativity, the author zeroes in on the paradox of free will. It entirely strips away the comforting excuse of, the devil made me do it.
Right. There is no devil whispering in your ear.
None. The book places the absolute crushing weight of human suffering squarely on human choice. The shadows in the world aren't cast by this dark entity.
They're cast by us.
Yeah, they're cast by the daily, seemingly mundane decisions of mankind.
Okay, so if he is trapped here, feeding off our negativity, how does the narrative actually track this? Because the book takes us on this massive chronological journey, starting with the early days of Christianity.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. And it sets up this stark contrast between the early believers and what the institution eventually becomes.
Right. So we start in the Roman catacombs. During the first few centuries, Christianity was an illegal underground movement.
Right. Believers faced brutal persecution.
Exactly. And the Antichrist admits in his narration that during this era, his job was agonizingly difficult.
Because they were actually good.
Yeah. Dealing with the early Christians was a tedious challenge because they were actually practicing what was preached. They were sharing their wealth, caring for the sick, and genuinely turning the other cheek when faced with Roman violence.
For those of us who haven't taken a world history class in a while, what exactly changes that? Because they obviously don't stay in the catacombs forever.
No, they don't. The turning point is the 4th century, specifically with Emperor Constantine and the Edict of Milan in 313 AD.
Okay, so the Romans make it legal.
More than just legal. Practically overnight, Christianity goes from being an illegal, fiercely guarded, fragile faith to becoming a legally recognized and eventually favored religion of the Roman Empire.
Wow, quite the pivot.
Huge pivot. The cross, which was an instrument of gruesome imperial execution, suddenly becomes the imperial cross, painted on the shields of soldiers.
So what does this all mean? It essentially becomes a career move, right?
Not much, yeah.
If the emperor likes this religion, suddenly the ambitious politicians, the wealthy merchants, and the opportunists all want to be baptized.
Precisely. And this is where the Antichrist starts to feel a shift. He watches basilicas being built, he sees gold shimmering on altars, and he realizes that the faith has shed its inherent danger.
And transformed into a badge of power.
Exactly.
Reading these chapters, it felt less like a spiritual awakening and more like a gritty corporate takeover.
That is a perfect analogy.
The moment they stopped worrying about surviving the lions in the Colosseum, what replaced that fear? They started worrying about who had the nicest silk robes and who was reciting the correct creed.
It became institutionalized.
Right. It's like the original radical mission of loving your neighbor was completely lost in brand management.
That brand management is exactly what the author highlights with events like the Council of Nicaea. The emperor needed unity in his empire, so the church leaders had to rigorously define the nature of God.
Down to the letter.
Right. But the tragic irony the book explores is that by putting divine love into a strict philosophical set of rules, they limited God to their own narrow understanding.
They put him in a box.
Yes. They gave birth to a new, meticulously theological tribalism. The fear of physical death was replaced by a more insidious fear, the fear of being theologically wrong.
And the creation of heresies just becomes a tool for political control.
Exactly.
And the Antichrist is just standing in the corner of these grand councils, probably taking a deep sigh of relief, realizing he doesn't even have to work for it anymore.
He's on a break.
Seriously, dissent from the creed literally became dissent from the emperor. Humanity had learned to cultivate division with absolute precision.
And that leads directly into the darkest eras of history. The author illustrates this tragic symbiosis between the throne and the altar.
Oh, this part was brutal.
Fast forward a few centuries, and the church becomes the largest landowner in Europe. You have illiterate warlords seeking validation from bishops and popes crowning emperors.
The power dynamic is completely flipped.
Right. The original gospel's call for humility becomes a very faint echo in halls filled with immense wealth.
Just picture the imagery the author uses here. You have the Antichrist standing in a gold-dripping Renaissance cathedral, watching a religious leader sell literal salvation for coins and indulgences, and Antichrist is just resting his head against a marble pillar, completely exhausted.
Because human greed has outsourced his job.
He is essentially unemployed. Humanity is taking their absolute worst instincts, like greed, violence, the hunger for land, and dressing them up in a holy banner.
The psychological horror of those middle chapters is profound.
It really is.
This raises an important question. How easily does human free will choose the sword over the cross? Look at how the narrative frames the Crusades and the Inquisition.
Oh man, the Inquisition.
You have the sack of Jerusalem where streets ran red with the blood of innocents, all justified by soldiers crying, "God wills it," on behalf of a faith that preaches loving your enemy.
And the Inquisition chapters, I mean, I had to put the book down for a second because the horror isn't just the physical torture, it's the mental gymnastics they use to justify it, right?
Yes. The inquisitors genuinely convinced themselves, through incredibly intricate theological arguments, that a brief, excruciating torment of the physical body was a righteous act of love if it saved the soul from eternal damnation.
Which is just terrifying logic.
It is a chilling exploration of how, when an institution prioritizes its own power and absolute ideological purity over individual human lives, it profoundly betrays its deepest tenets. The corruption of a good intention creates a darker shadow than pure malice ever could.
The shadows in those dungeon cells weren't cast by a demon. They were cast by human pride and terror.
Exactly.
And the historical absurdity just keeps escalating in the book. You get to the Western Schism in the late Middle Ages, where there are literally 3 popes at the exact same time.
Almost comical.
It is. One is in Rome, one is in Avignon. They are all excommunicating each other, and European monarchs are just picking sides based entirely on political convenience.
Which naturally paves the way for the Reformation. But the author shows how even the Reformation, which started with a genuine desire to strip away corruption and return to the simple gospel, explodes into massive fragmentation.
It just splinters everything.
Right. It breeds new doctrines, new rigid dogmas, and leads straight into the 30 Years' War.
And for context, for anyone who doesn't know, the 30 Years' War was one of the most destructive conflicts in human history. Entire villages burned, populations decimated.
And much of that bloodshed was over subtle differences in how to interpret grace and salvation. They cast off one form of institutional tyranny only to replace it with another, equally violent form of tribalism.
Okay, so I'm thinking about the structure of the book here. If the religious institutions were making the Antichrist job so incredibly easy, you would think the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, would ruin everything for him.
You would think so.
Right. People are explicitly rejecting the church. They are leaning into science, reason, and human rights. Did the Age of Reason actually give the Antichrist a run for his money? Did he finally start to starve?
You would think so, but no. The author expertly pivots the narrative to show how humanity didn't break their chains. They simply swapped them for new ones.
Oh, wow. Swap chains.
Yeah. The philosophers and scientists laid bare the mechanics of the universe, and reason became the new God. But this new God brought its own fatal flaws. The pursuit of pure, unfeeling reason led to a chilling disregard for the messy, irrational depths of the human heart.
It becomes this grand, tragic experiment in human arrogance. The book dives into the French and American revolutions here, and the author does a brilliant job of impartially reporting the historical irony.
It's very well researched.
It is. These revolutions cast off kings and old religious dogmas, and they replaced them with beautiful abstract ideals. Liberty, the nation, reason. But almost immediately, the French Revolution devolves into the guillotine and the Reign of Terror.
A bloodbath.
Exactly. And the American Revolution, with its lofty declarations that all men are created equal, is born simultaneously alongside the brutal reality of chattel slavery and the systematic displacement of indigenous peoples. Freedom for some was still functioning as tyranny for others.
The ideological shift didn't change the underlying human nature. The old religious wars merely gave way to ideological and political wars.
The same violence, just a different justification.
Exactly. Even without a church dictating every thought, human arrogance and the desire to dominate persisted. The gods of man required just as much blood as the dogmas of the past.
It's like we upgraded the societal operating system. We went from medieval dogma 1.0 to Enlightenment 2.0, and eventually to digital outrage 5.0.
I love that framing.
We gave it a sleeker interface, but the core malware, human cruelty, self-righteousness, and the need for an outgroup is still hard-coded into the programming.
That is the perfect analogy, and that malware scales horrifyingly in the 20th century. The author describes the 1900s as a grotesque banquet for the Antichrist.
A banquet. Wow.
You have world wars driven by hypernationalism and industrialized might, genocides, the Holocaust, Cambodia, Rwanda, where the dehumanization of the other is systematized and executed with factory-like efficiency.
It's so dark.
It's humanity's raw capacity for evil, magnified by unchecked technological and state power.
And while all this state-sponsored horror is happening, the book also touches on the inner rot of the institutions that were supposed to be society's moral compass.
The church's internal failings.
Right. The modern era exposes the moral lapses within the church, protecting the institution's image over protecting the innocent, shuffling perpetrators from parish to parish, the ultimate betrayal of trust.
It all just feeds the narrator.
It keeps him trapped at that desk, processing endless files of human failing.
Which brings the narrative to our current moment, the 21st century, and the digital deluge.
Now, if you are listening to this and rolling your eyes thinking, oh, great, another book lecturing me about how social media is bad, you're completely missing the twist.
It's not a preachy lecture at all.
No. The author doesn't frame the algorithm as evil. The algorithm is just a mirror, and the Antichrist is utterly horrified by the reflection.
Exactly. The digital age is fascinating because it initially held this utopian promise of unprecedented connection and global understanding.
We thought it would bring us together.
But instead, as the author synthesizes, the internet allows humanity to do the Antichrist's job faster and more comprehensively than any supernatural force ever could.
We built a machine that operates at the speed of light. It breeds absolute tribalism. Anonymity allows cruelty to flow without consequence.
Misinformation poisons minds instantly.
Yes, we curate these hermetically sealed echo chambers where we only connect with people who validate our own prejudices, and we hurl digital stones at anyone who dares to think differently.
The mechanism of the Antichrist's existence, feeling the weight of human negativity, becomes overwhelming. Even without religious dogmas, even without the physical torture of the Inquisition, human beings are generating a blinding torrent of negative energy entirely on their own.
Just sitting on their couches.
Right. The constant outrage, the self-righteousness, the digital mobs, they generate this energy, and it physically sustains his existence. He doesn't command the hateful comment. He just has to feel it every time humanity chooses to type it.
Which brings us to the ultimate emotional climax of the book. And I want to be incredibly careful here. We are absolutely not going to spoil the ending or how the narrative resolves.
No spoilers today.
You really have to experience the tension the author builds in those final pages. But the stakes in the present day are palpable.
In the final chapters, the narrator is essentially breaking the fourth wall, begging humanity to look at the paradox they've built.
It's such a desperate plea.
It is. He points out that his immortality is entirely contingent on our free will. He strips away all the theology, all the councils and creeds, and points back to the startling simplicity of what Jesus laid out: love your neighbor.
Just that one thing.
It was never meant to be a complex theological treatise used to divide people. It was a radical, incredibly simple governing command.
And the Antichrist is telling us, if we just do this, if we relentlessly embody love, not as an institutional ritual, but as an active, daily choice, he will dissolve.
The cosmic courtroom will close.
He will finally get to rest. And the emotional weight of that plea coming from the supposed Lord of Darkness is just staggering.
It forces a profound self-reflection on the reader. Because the grand sweep of history, the empires, the crusades, the revolutions, they're all composed of individual, microscopic human choices.
I cannot emphasize enough how much this book challenged my perspective. It's a masterclass in philosophical tension, wrapped in a genuinely gripping narrative.
It really is.
You absolutely must experience the vibe and the heavy, lingering questions the story leaves you with. The book is called The Antichrist in the Paradox of Faith by Berns pen. It is available right now. I highly, highly recommend grabbing a copy and diving in immediately.
It will definitely stay with you long after you put it down. And, to leave you with one final thought to mull over today, building on that digital dilemma we just discussed.
Yeah, lay it on us.
If the Antichrist is sustained by our daily microscopic choices for negativity, what happens to him when you simply choose not to hit send on a hateful comment today? Does that tiny, seemingly insignificant act of digital restraint actually physically weaken the ancient embodiment of evil?
Does stepping away from the keyboard and choosing empathy let that exhausted clerk in the cosmic courtroom finally pack up one of his files? Go read the book and decide for yourself.